ATSI's, yeah, welcome everybody to ATSI's start to finish mitigation presentation. This is going to be a little different than what's going to be in person. Where I created a video of a project that we had worked on from start to finish with delineation, mitigation plan, install, maintenance, and monitoring, and then install, monitoring, and maintenance. And so that video is just it's just one specific project, but it's a really good snapshot of what I was going to present in the mitigation installation. And we can certainly stop, or we can stop during the video. It's really short. It's only like 5 minutes, 6 minutes long. And we can stop if anybody has questions, raise your hand, or we can wait till the end. It's totally fine. And we can go into all the details of it. This is, before we do get into it, I just want to highlight, this is buffer mitigation. So who knows? So I guess before we get into the presentation, to the video, I'd like to, thought came into my head. So who knows what about mitigation?
Well, Sierra and I know it from a bonding standpoint. So it's pretty much all been, the report has been drawn, the city has already, or the municipality has approved it, and whomever, and it's ready, shovel in the dirt by the time we see it. So part of the reason we're here is we wanted to see everything you guys have to identify, plan for, all the beginning.
So the bond, just because this is going to go on the internet and someone may not have any idea what a bond is. So what do you mean surety bond? What are you talking about?
2 phases, to guarantee the completion of the installation of the mitigation measures. And then before that can be released, typically a bond for the maintenance and monitoring, 2-year, 3-year, 5-year, to make sure that those mitigation measures stand up, aren't removed by someone, aren't planted over.
Yeah, excellent. So if I may, someone pays somebody money, and that's the bond, and then they get that money back over the maintenance and monitoring period. Is that right?
Essentially, yes. We set the overall money to the side. The developer pays a premium on that, like they would an insurance policy.
Got it. Excellent. Oh, well, I actually didn't know company like you guys existed, so I can certainly, that's super helpful, because the bond is always usually people pay it directly to the county with projects that we're working on, so that's actually super helpful. Yeah, that's awesome. Okay,
they're not easy to get, I'll tell you that.
They're not easy to get. No. Okay.
No. But we do it.
Excellent. Yeah, excellent. That's super helpful. I'd like to hear more about how. Yeah, Corey, how about yourself? What do you guys
say? We know about it from like a geologically hazard standpoint. So landslide, seismic, liquefaction, erosion, mitigation, and how we can prevent or either reinforce your building or prevent it from, going into wetlands or other people's yards down the road, etc.
Yeah, excellent. So what kind of questions are you hoping to get protection from with your work?
I can't think of anything specific at the moment, but if I learn something, I'll pass it on down the line. We have a lot of 90% of what we do is special inspections, which includes like CECL, so erosion hazards, and how we can better mitigate, especially nowadays with so much impervious surfaces. So
so impervious surface, CECL. So okay, for people that don't know what CECL is, I think people can kind of guess what impervious surface is, but would you mind kind of telling some people what CECL is and how that relates?
Yeah, it's just it's like a certified erosion control person. So you would go, we visit construction sites, active construction sites, maybe even ahead of time before they break ground, so we can get a feel for, oh, hey, we got a hillside over there what are they doing with it? Are they going to strip it? And then, you know, it rains all the time here. So we just have to, we have people that are certified in helping contractors, you know, give them advice on how they can keep from getting in trouble with the local municipalities, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Getting away from getting in trouble with local municipalities is really important. Super important.
Yeah, nobody wants a fine.
Nobody wants a fine, and that's yeah, and that's the fines can come in for sure, especially if mitigation, especially wetland mitigation, is not followed, right? So that's a big piece of how we hope to save people money. Okay, thank you, Corey. Anybody else have? Lance, what about you? What do you know about wetland mitigation?
I know that it's a pain in the butt.
It is a pain in the butt. That's right.
So
have you heard that from
my experience
contractors and stuff?
I had some mitigation when I did a project for Northwest Soccer Park. And
we
put in the turf fields, and yeah, that was really wonderful to deal with the county on that aspect.
Wonderful sounds a little sarcastic.
Sarcasm.
Sarcasm. You're not that's a very common comment with sarcasm is very common when talking about most jurisdictions working with wetland mitigation stuff.
And I do know that there's a lot of money expended, sometimes overboard, in order to satisfy the requirements.
Yeah, and yep. And the requirements, satisfying those requirements is hard for pretty much everybody in development. It's just a lot of time and money involved. Yeah, 100%. How about Dan? Dan, for everyone online, Dan is typing. Mitigation is what must be done to satisfy requirements to develop impacts. Yes, that's right. Developing impacts, developing a property essentially is development impacts to those critical areas. So essentially mitigation allows you to develop when you impact critical areas. From a development perspective, our biggest challenge is getting to an improved delineation. Yeah, that's difficult, depending on who you work with. Yeah, our objective is to reduce costly delays due to repetitive submittal. Yeah, repetitive submittal can certainly be super expensive, both in time and money, right? You're waiting, you get a report back, and you get confidence that it's going to work, and then it doesn't, and then you have to wait a couple months, especially up here in Whatcom County or even any other jurisdiction where the regulators are just so overwhelmed that they can barely get to stuff, and so they send it back with red lines, and then you have to pay someone else or pay the same consultant again to go back out. It gets super expensive. And accuracy is super important, and trust with the jurisdictions is really important as with wetland consultants. So, and so any specific questions? So you have for Dan that you hoping to get out of? You said our objective is to reduce costly delays. So maybe this can help you kind of get a bigger picture to streamline your proposals. Is it kind of what you're thinking? Yeah. Oh, he's typing. Can you guys see him type? I see him type. How to get from start to a project to accepted delineation. Okay. Yeah. So getting to an accepted delineation, that is, we can certainly talk more about that as we go along. To get to start of a project to an acceptable delineation. Yeah. So feasibility, and that's all about experience, right? That's all about accuracy, essentially. And it's something that is a project by project thing, and we have over 50 years of environmental consulting experience here in our office, so that's something that we really rely on. Okay, 50 years of combined environmental experience. No one's been here for 50 years. Okay, so all right, any other questions from Kim? Kim, do you have any questions, or Sierra, or the AI note taker?
Yeah, I think I'm just here to learn, and I know a little bit about mitigation just from being here, but I'm definitely looking forward to learning more, and especially like seeing like all these different, people from different like companies and different like specialties, kind of seeing how it all comes together. that's gonna be
Yeah,
really cool to see.
seeing how it all comes together with everybody's super helpful. Yeah, because it's just one project that occurs, and lots of different people and lots of groups of people are all working on it at the same time, right?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, let's go ahead and just show the video here. So again, this is a video of a specific project that we worked on called Whispering Meadows. It's in Everson, Washington. It's a 40-acre lot, and it's done in 2 phases. I don't know how many units there are. There's lots of units. I'd have to count. Don't know right now, but you'll see a lot of aerials about it. And this is just start to finish, from working with from raw land all the way to maintenance and monitoring of the 6-acre mitigation site that we installed. Okay, so I'll go ahead and jump onto the video. There's no music, so that's a bummer, but we can play it. So just go ahead and raise your hand in Teams if you have a question, or you can chime in, get yourself off mute, chime in, answer a question, say, hey, Tony, what about that? Hey, what's going on with this here? In our experience, this happened. We can totally stop, not a problem, and just go through it. Cool?
Tony, quick question. Is this for a
Yeah.
housing development, or is this for an industrial development? What is the purpose?
Great question. It's a single family housing development. Yeah, so it's a single family home development. Okay, here we go. So yeah, this drone footage was done during our maintenance monitoring period. That's what it looks like now, or last year. Original property. So you can see pretty obvious wetland right here, right? I believe this is part of Nooksack Slough up near Everson. A lot of times with farm fields, it gets really, really difficult to delineate wetlands because the consistent consistent tilling can actually impact the ground so that it creates an artificial wetland. But regardless, because of how wetland science is done, it's still considered a jurisdictional wetland most of the time, because it's what has happened to the land naturally, even though it wasn't natural. So my point is, delineating farm fields are very, very difficult, and they're generally very contentious. But thank God this one was pretty simple. So we'll just keep going here. So here's just a quick overview of our 57-page critical areas report. Real quick, it's a wetland delineation map from the report. Zooming in a little bit, so you can see really kind of intuitive what you would have thought if you would have looked at it. Right down next to the wetland slough, right down the middle. There's 165-foot buffers on either side. These are different sample plots. Took one here. So what you do is you take paired plots along what people imagine our wetland line. So plot 1 right here, you take a data plot, run the analysis, find out if it's a wetland, and then you do the second plot on where you anticipate the wetland to not be, run the analysis, find out it's not a wetland. That will determine the line, and then you use topography and vegetation, generally speaking, to go down the line here. Now, of course, different jurisdictions have different people working at them, so different interpretations on the science, different interpretations on the regulations. So this was done in Everson, the city of Everson. So the city of Everson has, generally speaking, been very simple and easy to work with. A lot of other jurisdictions have a lot more stricter interpretations of code and science. And that's just something we got to work with, right? Everybody's got different opinions, and yeah. So this is the beginning of phase 1 here. Remove the buffers just to show you where phase 1 is. First phase of the development of Whistling Meadows. Here is the buffer, gets reapplied to the site so you can see the impact area. I'll show you that. I'll show you that here in the video. Right. So these are the impacts to the wetland buffers. Those need to be mitigated for through the mitigation process. That's our actual wetland mitigation plan from the report. That's the planting area. This is when we're breaking ground, or when the developer broke ground. That's when the house is starting, and you can see, if you keep a look on this area, you can see the resulting mitigation, what it was like before and what it was like after. So for phase 1, we assisted with some of the smaller mitigation installations, like inside here. Can you see my mouse? See my mouse? Good. Inside of here, we didn't do the original install, but you can see, right, it's a pretty dramatic effect. To it. And the purpose of the mitigation, if it's not obvious, is to create a buffer between human impacts to the critical areas, right? So the wetland, so if we go back, you can see the wetland is here. And so the buffer is here and here. So this isn't getting into buffer or into wetland. It's just into the buffer. So the mitigation area, which is again the yellow area here, the intention is to protect the critical areas from man-made impacts, from man-made use. So it's always, generally speaking, going to be between the development and the critical area.
Hey, Tony.
Yes.
Cameron asked a question.
Yes.
Wanting to know who sets the depth of the buffer, because
great question.
They've seen very in depth.
Thank you very much for interrupting. I really appreciate that, Kim. I want to make sure I get to everybody's questions. So, who sets the buffers? Essentially, it's a combination of the Department of Ecology and local jurisdictions. So the Department of Ecology has what's called a rating form. A rating form is, and I think we have some pictures of it here. I zoomed through it here at the end of the report. So these are some images of the rating form. Yeah. So this is the rating forms for some of the sample points. So there's two different forms. There's a data form, which look like this. This is the data form. It's kind of hard to see because it's just through the video. And this determines, the data form determines if you have a wetland. The rating form determines what type of wetland and how big the buffer is. Yeah. So wetlands, this is going to sound confusing. There's 4 different categories of wetlands, and each one of those wetlands has a low, each one of those categories of wetlands has a low, medium, and high buffer depending on the use of the site. So the buffer is the rating of the wetland is determined on these forms right here, which is the rating form, which is different than the data form that we showed earlier. So these rating forms are what determine that. So there's lots of different questions. Is the wetland depressional? is the entire wetland unit located in a very flat area with no obvious depressions and no overbank flooding. The unit does not pond surface water more than a few inches. The unit seems to be maintained by high groundwater in the area. The wetland may be ditched, but has no obvious natural outlet. Yes or no? No. There's lots of questions like that. And so you can get rating forms online. You can just pull them down and you can review them. It's a really specific standard set of questions that are used for every single wetland rating. Same thing goes for data forms. Now, to determine if something is hydric. So let's take a step back to get into if something's a wetland or not, and you're going to talk about the data forms, using the data forms to determine if something is a wetland or not. You'll have to identify hydric soils, hydration, and hydric vegetation. Hydric vegetation is complex only if you don't know plant identification. Right, once you get plant identification, it's really pretty easy to tell what you're looking for. The hydrology is pretty simple as well. If there's water in the hole when you dig it, essentially there's water. If there's water, that creates the hydrology. If there's water coming out of the soil as you dig it, there's hydrology. If there's ponding water, obviously it's hydrology. Of course, there's a lot more nuances to that. That's just super generic, as simplistic as I can talk about right now. But the hydric soils, to determine if it has a hydric soil, that takes a lot of training. And so that's something that I go through a little bit on our YouTube channel with some of the videos and differences of the different soils. So you're welcome to take a look at that. And you can see some of the hydric soil. But so the reason I was talking about all that is if you want to take the data forms and take the rating forms and go become a wetland biologist on your own for your own projects, it's certainly possible to use all those materials and to determine or anticipate what a wetland scientist is going to say, right? All this stuff is publicly available, right? All the science is absolutely publicly available. Was that helpful? I know that was a super in-depth question to determine who sets the buffer. Okay, yeah, and you can see a lot of these questions in the rating forms can be subjective, right? So sometimes if we find a rating question that maybe we weren't paying so close attention to, and the development isn't quite possible with our wetland rating, we will sometimes review our rating forms and be like, hey, is there anything that we can look closer at here? Right? Like, is this just for example, obviously this doesn't happen here, but is this a yes and not a no? Can we change this one of these questions to yes if we're really looking closely? And sometimes when we do that, it actually changes the rating form and reduces the buffer. So it certainly has some influence by the wetland scientist as they do the rating form. So it's a combination of these guidelines and these rating forms set by the Department of Ecology, and then the interpretation of both the third-party consultant and the regulator as they're going through it. Usually the regulators don't look through the rating form super closely, especially if they're working with someone they trust. Yeah, so that was a really in-depth question. Was that helpful? Yeah, okay, good. Okay, all right, let's keep going. Any other questions on any of that? All right. Impacts. Mitigation planting. Got past that. The differences, results of the mitigation, highlighted. Kind of zooming back out here to the whole project, looking at phase 2. Phase 2, there's a lot of houses all the way through here. This is an access road. This is some housing units as well. This development, they sold lots, and then people could build on the lots. Buffers put on. You see the impacts on the buffers. We have a little bit of wetland impact up here, but this developer kept it all to buffer impacts, not wetland impacts, because they built a bridge that was in a culvert to avoid impacts to the slough, to the wetland itself. There's the actual mitigation plan from the project. And no, and let me take a step back. I misspoke. There is some wetland impacts here. So we did some. So if you look on the map, there's different types. So this is wetland enhancement right here. This light blue. This is buffer enhancement. This is buffer enhancement. These are shrub area. I believe this is tree area. So different types of plants in different areas of the mitigation to achieve different results. This is a fence, split rail fence, about 2,400 feet of split rail fence, all the way down here, then along the road here, down this way. Just kind of highlight, show you so that we can see the differences. Show you where the mitigation area is against the aerial. On this site, there was a access road that wasn't supposed to be there from before the owner that needed to be restored. There's a picture of the area. Here are the figures that we did of the restoration. Right at the very end, you see the road actually gets removed, and then we cap it off, and then we plant. Now, we don't actually cap it with anything, but we do stop the road from produce. So when we did the split rail fence here, this is a draft figure. This is before the final one, but the split rail fence looks like it goes here on this document, but oh no, that's accurate. It does go along the line here, and then it stops up here. So there's a lot of different stuff going on in this project. It's a mitigation site. Access road gets installed in 2022. And this is when we perform the buffer mitigation install. We just had 80 truckloads of mulch come in, back up, dump them out as the first step. Here I am having fun with the drone. We push the mulch out to do sheet mulching. So there's two different thoughts, schools of thoughts about this, right? So you can either do sheet mulching, or you could do rings around each plant. When you do rings around each plant, it becomes very labor inducive because you have to pay for all the people to take the mulch, put it around each individual plant. For this project, we decided to do a sheet mulch because of the topography essentially made it very easy to do because it's mostly flat. If at different sites, you can't do sheet mulch, and so it costs more to do sheet mulch if you were going to do that. So it's essentially what we're doing is putting a large, thick layer of mulch along the entire mitigation site. If you notice, there are some holes left over. These are stormwater outlets for the development that we planted with a specific plant, but it couldn't use mulch in it because it would clog up the stormwater outlets. This is a little bit later. We brought a little bit more mulch in and we finished the sheet mulch. Total 7,600 plants. So these are tables from the the mitigation plan. So you can see it's really specific. It's like this many plants of this type, this many plants of this type. Often when you are purchasing these plants from the different nurseries, they won't have the exact plant type you need. So they will give you, and it's allowable to provide a replacement plant, right? I mean, as long as it meets the same purpose. So for example, if you're doing buffer repairing, if I recall correctly, when we were doing buffer repairing enhancement planting, which is the largest planting area on the site, we couldn't get enough of bitter cherry. If I'm recalling correctly, right? We need 150 of those. So we just added 150 black cottonwood. So we did 350. We did 300 black cottonwood instead of 150 of each. So as long as it serves as long as the plant is able to serve its purpose as intended, it really doesn't matter what type of plant you put in there. Same thing goes for wetland enhancement. And you see this, we had different plants for stormwater outfalls. Those are those areas we didn't put mulch in. Like I said, 2,400 feet of split rail fence installed. And this was our monitoring video. After we did maintained, you can see the split rail fence here along the edge. So this is looking north. So the bridge that we look at is right here, if you can imagine. And the video is going to turn around. You can see the whole site. So you can see what it looked like before when we first put mulch on it. So before we go too farther, before we get too deep, let's take a step back. If we take a look at this right here, you can see these areas that don't have mulch on them. We did do ring mulch in those areas. But the first step before we did that was to remove this. This is that access road that we did the restoration with. We cut down all these invasives here. These fields we pretty much just left alone until we did planting because there's not much to do. So that can give you some before and after images of that. And when we look here, you can see the road is still there, but we planted in it. You can kind of see some plants in here. Put the split rail fence. This is all grown up from the planting that we did in there. See, the road here is removed. Plants in this area as well. Start to see it to grow up. Plants along the edge. Field planted, you can see the different plants here. Different mulches around. It's still growing. Took off pretty well up there. And this is what the big mitigation site looks like in 2023. You see some of the mulch sticking out of it. That's a good thing. That means the reason you put mulch on the mitigation sites is to suppress blackberries, essentially. So you'll see as we look through this, you'll notice patches of mulch. That's just inconsistent leveling of the mulch as we go through, and see a stormwater outlet here of these little plants. When we planted these, it was very, very densely packed with many, many single bare rooted plants. So this was a lot more dense than the rest of this area. So this mulch back here was thicker. So you can see the plants through here. So once you do the sheet mulch and you go through and we planted those 7,000 plants, we would just dig through the mulch, make sure that there is a little donut of non-mulch around the plant, and then finish the mulch around that to make sure it doesn't sink into the hole that you put the plant in. Plant. So this will grow up to be a beautiful back area. Stormwater inlet, outlet here. See the different types of plants in it. Blackberries that were cut down and grown back. And the slough. And so, yeah, that's the whole development. That's the whole case study for with Spring Meadows development.
Question for you, Tony.
Yeah.
On something like that, there's two questions here. First of
all,
how much time do you have to spend with the regulatory agency? And number two, what is the overall cost, when somebody looks at mitigating something like that?
The cost is certainly expensive. There's the permitting, right? There's the front end design work. Then, of course, there's the install. There's the maintenance and monitoring. Each one of those obviously is expensive. Total cost, you're looking at probably $250,000 over the entire 10. That includes the very first delineations, and it's probably more like 300,000.
Okay.
Because this project was done since 2018, so 300,000 since 2018. If that includes the original delineations, the mitigation site, the install of the mitigation site, the monitoring, and the maintenance, and that also includes future, because there's no wetland enhancement. There was only a little bit of wetland enhancement. And so phase 2 has a 10-year monitoring cycle. Phase 1 only had a 5-year monitoring cycle. So phase 1 is closed out. We're either closed out or at year 4. But phase 2 is at year 3. So it has a long ways to go until either A, it closes out early, or it completes the 10 years. So 300,000 for the entire project over the whole 10 years. Yeah. Yeah, and obviously huge, about $170,000 of that is from the install. So the other question is, how much time do we spend with regulators? So our connection with the regulator, I don't know how to track that in terms of number of hours. Our connection with the regulators is after we produce the report. So we have connection with the regulators when we first submit the report in the first application. Usually that can take up to a month, back and forth. Then you have the monitoring reports and the as-built. You really usually, although those go to the regulators, those are usually not challenged.
Okay.
So there isn't any real connection with the regulators at that point. When you do wetland creation, at year 5 of the 10-year monitoring cycle, the state and the federal regulators will come and review the site. So that's about a day at year 5 with the regulators walking the site, reviewing everything. Yeah, and then if you attempt to close out, which if I recall correctly on phase 1 here, I believe we actually did close out early. There's a lot of connection with the regulators while you're going through that process. Is that helpful? Was that helpful?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, so Dan says, I assume jurisdictions do evaluations of the development site as part of their process of approval. Does the jurisdiction provide copies of documentation of their evaluation of the document site? No, not that I recall. They will provide documentation of an NOAR, which will sometimes usually generalize and sometimes specifically say what their response to the evaluation. We do not have access to their specific notes when they do their original evaluation of the delineation in the site. And then Dan continues, such documentation would be useful for a consultant in reaching agreement on an acceptable delineation. Yeah, no, absolutely. And so in our experience, we will get a notice of additional requirements, NOAR, from the county, and we can use that document to continue the negotiations with the regulators. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Yeah, but the direct notes, like if a regulator came on site right after we did delineation and he took notes, those documents are not available. Those are not public documents that I know of. So Dan's typing here again. Was that helpful, Dan? I'm imagining he's saying yes. Seems deliberately vague. I'm not sure it is intended, but that is an issue for us. Yeah, and this is going to sound like I'm casting shade on other regulators. I'm sorry, this is going to sound like I'm casting shade on other consultants. It all depends on the consultant you're working with. If you are working with a consultant that the regulators trust, it is a very open and honest conversation. If the regulators don't trust their consultants, then they are going to be deliberately vague. Because they don't. I mean, there's certain consultants in certain jurisdictions that the regulators almost automatically assume their documents are inaccurate because of their experience with those certain consultants, that it is inaccurate. So often what happens, and from our conversations with other professional wetland scientists in the area, is there's many consultants that want to help developers. And so they say, again, this is going to sound like I'm casting shade. My earbuds just went out. Can you guys still hear me? This is gonna talking smack about other consultants. Other consultants will just say, it's just like any other industry. Other consultants will just say what their client wants to hear in order to get the project. And regretfully, what happens is the client and the consultant exchange an enormous amount of money, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars, and the project doesn't go through, which it should have never even been attempted if the consultant, in my opinion, if the consultant was being not honest, but sometimes dishonest. I mean, it's just like any other profession, right? CPAs, there's lots of CPAs who lie. There's lots of CPAs that get sued. It's.
Keep in mind, this is being recorded, Tony.
I know, and I'm going to put it online. I know, I'm trying to be very careful. Yeah, no, I'm kind of a. No, no, that's all right. That's all right.
I'll stand by my words. I don't mind talking. There's a lot of regulators that agree with, it's very common. So.
I have another question, Tony.
Yeah, absolutely.
With a lot of talk, particularly here in Whatcom County, but I know in some other counties,
with
the development of wetland mitigation banks.
Yeah.
How does this impact what takes place for a developer, a contractor? Can you kind of briefly describe how that is beneficial or expedites this process?
Yeah, the expedition done by, I'm not sure if that's a word, but expediting the process is possible with a wetland bank. Wetland banks make everything more simple. For example, when we do projects down in Skagit County, there is a Skagit County wetland bank. So that dramatically, there's also, let's take another step back. There's also the Lummi wetland bank, but they're not accepting. They actually are accepting applications. They have,
are they?
Yeah, for the last year, but they're pretty selective on who they take, from what I'm referring to, if I recall correctly. Same issue, right? As a Skagit bank, in terms of cost and efficiency of a project. It's a lot more efficient to put in your mitigation plan. All these impacts will be taken care of by the wetland bank. That's literally the sentence you put in the report. Right? You show the impacts like we did in our report, and then you have a line that says all of these will be taken care of by the wetland bank. Normally, you have to you have to design the plan, you have to lay that all out, you have to put performance standards. There's a lot more work that needs to be done on the consultant side that using a bank eliminates. Thank you. But then you have the cost of the wetland credits. In Lummi, at the Lummi Bank, it's $400,000 an acre credit if you're not a Lummi national. Yeah. So in Skagit Wetland Bank, I think it's something like $250,000 a credit. They have a lot. Skagit has a lot more available, or at least they have a lot more available to the general public than the Lummi Wetland Bank. Yeah.
So with the project you just highlighted, how many acres of mitigation did you do there, and what would be the equitable cost if we were using the Lummi or the Skagit Bank?
Great question. So we did 6 acres, 6.1 acres. Yeah, it's a huge mitigation site. Let me show you. Yeah, I actually have most of this all done on Google Earth. I can just pull that up real quick.
Well, that just in itself tells you your initial discussion that was 300,000, and the other is you're talking almost 2 million.
Well, let's take a step back. This is all buffer enhancement, right? So that's not a wetland credit. You need a buffer credit. Skagit Wetland Bank has both wetland and buffer credits. I believe Lummi Bank only has wetland credits. So the cost for buffer credits are much more affordable than wetland credits. So, yeah, you can just take a look at this is what the project looks like now in 2023, right? 23. Yeah, so out of the 40 acres, this is Google Earth Pro. If you guys don't use Google Earth Pro, highly recommend it. It's a free service online. Where is this guy here? You can get apply down here. 40-acre site. Then within that 40-acre site. So to answer your question, to do this project would probably be a lot more affordable through a buffer bank. I mean, I don't know the cost of what Skagit Bank is costing for buffer credits, but probably a lot more affordable. Yeah.
And probably a lot quicker.
Probably a lot quicker. The Skagit Bank will do, you do need to do a wetland bank report. However, when you submit for projects, however, Skagit Wetland Bank will do that for you for free. And so your cost, like let's say this was all wetland credits, this project I highlighted, and somehow we're able to do it on site. 300,000, 400,000 is probably accurate because you also have to create wetlands. If you were to purchase all that in a, half of that is permitting, half of that is our work. $200,000 over 10 years is delineation, mitigation report, monitoring. And that's a rough number. That's a super rough number. This is a massive project. It takes a lot of effort to do this work. But that being said, if you had to just go to a bank, you probably would, your client would have spent maybe 20 grand on a consultancy and then the rest in the bank credits. Yeah.
But just so I'm clear, in our experience, buying those buffer credits would essentially have allowed them to put in another street of houses that back right up to the wetland. Correct?
Let's take a step back again. So let's take a step back. So in this project, short answer, no. Long answer, yes. Is that helpful?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So
are you a regulator?
No, I just play one on TV. So you still have to. So let's go back to the map here. You still, if we should pull up all these different things. Get the wetland, the property.
Mm-hmm.
We don't need that. We have phase 2 impacts. We have the buffer. We'll just use this on this side just for simplicity. So this is the impacts to the buffer, right? This is reducing the buffer, if I recall correctly, by 25%. That looks about 25%. So you can reduce a buffer by a certain amount without going to get a variance permit. The moment you do a variance permit, now there's administrative variance and then there's actual variance permits. Some wetlands, you can reduce the buffer up to 50% through an administrative variance that does not require going in front of a hearing examiner. If you go beyond the administrative variance, they need to go in front of a hearing examiner, and you can definitely get declined, regardless if you're using buffer bank or on-site mitigation. So the amount of buffer that you can use to impact depends on the jurisdictional allowances of reduction of buffer. It really has nothing to do with if it's a bank or not. Now, that being said, different jurisdictions are a lot more lenient with buffer impacts or wetland impacts than other jurisdictions. So in certain jurisdictions, the answer is yes, 100%. You can reduce the buffer all the way to the wetland. They will allow it. Other jurisdictions, they will not allow that based on precedents or the project or whatever. The bank, so down south in Skagit and Island County, generally speaking, the attitude is very positive that as long as you can mitigate for the impacts, they'll generally allow it. Again, that's really specific to the project. That's, it's just different attitude. Yeah. Whatcom County, not so much. It's really going to depend on the specifics of the project, et cetera, et cetera. But they're in the precedent. Bellingham, you need a lot of precedent. Like we're going through a variance permit for a project where we are going to reduce the buffers beyond 50% in a project in Bellingham, and it's been this massive negotiation and time-consuming, intensive, deliberate action on the part of us and the client to approach the regulators in a very specific way so that we can begin to get the variance to be approved. Is that helpful?
Yeah.
Yeah, good.
Thank you.
So what, a lot of questions I'm getting about timeline with regulators and the negotiation with the regulators. Yeah, that's hard. It's all about that negotiation, especially with the regulators. Yeah, yeah, yep, 100%. It seems like you guys have a reason for bringing up these issues, for regulating issues.
Not so much regulators, but we deal with this kind of stuff with the counties a lot and other local municipalities when it comes to mitigating for like landslide hazards, especially in Snohomish County. Like we'll do a full geotechnical like geohazard evaluation, and the county, the reviewer, who will leave his name out, but he sends us back the same comments for projects like year after year. So and we do our best to address those comments because we know he's going to ask them, and then we just have to go, did you read the report? And then we'll go through our report, and in his comments, we'll basically almost copy and paste what we put in our report and send it right back. We just have to spell it out. So I can see where it would get frustrating in these aspects as well, especially if you know, I think we've all seen the job market these days turning over pretty quickly, right? People are hopping there, trying to get ahead. So, you know, one year you might be working with Joe, and the next year you're working with John, and you got to start from scratch. It can get really frustrating.
Yeah, starting from scratch is super costly too, right? I mean, just in time and money, and like you said, very frustrating. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, 100%. Does anybody else have any other things they'd like to share about their experiences with the regulators?
I think it might be I don't know how, you know, everybody's experience, but it might be a good to comment on, you know, what time of the year are these, you know, BMPs and these wetlands and stuff being, you know, installed or planted, right? Because like if you're laying out all that mulch, probably don't want to be doing it, you know, in January when we have all these heavy rains, and then it just washes all your mulch down the road or down the slope or into the creek.
Yeah, making sure the mitigation doesn't get washed away is a huge issue. This project, we used hog fuel. Hog fuel mulch is super thick, super thick. So it's essentially like, it's like pieces of wood like this. They're just like, it's almost not even mulch. And so actually a lot of this installation we did in January, if I recall correctly. We laid the mulch down because of the issues that you're talking about, we laid the mulch down in March and right before August, so that we didn't get caught in the mud, and then we planted in January and February because that's when we get to bare root. Yeah, no, but it's absolutely starting from scratch can be extremely frustrating and time consuming and costly, and it's a problem we see a lot with a lot of different people. Yeah. Dan is typing here. Nope, he stopped typing. Oh, he started. Developers would prefer to pay the jurisdiction to do the delineation. There's just too many problems with interpretation. Regulators are not consistent. Yeah, consistency amongst regulators is a problem, and the regulators will say that.
Well, even more so if they don't like your project, if it's going in a particular area, like possibly with you on this project may have been potentially ag land, if they're have some objections about that.
Right. What are the objections of what are the personal objections of the regulator that you're negotiating with? 100%. Yeah, that can definitely, personal opinion can affect all work.
Is that a problem that you've ran into personally before?
I have personally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I ended up having a regulator with Whatcom County who, when I was putting in the artificial turf fields at the soccer park, she didn't like the project from the get-go, but she also said she brought up everything to try to throw it off and to cancel it out. She even said that where the soccer park was, I was putting it on existing soccer fields. She said that was a shorebird site, and there were seagulls, and they showed up every morning at 6:30 to 8, but you would never see them again. And she forced us to pay for a $12,000 wetland bird study. And fortunately, it came back, and somebody in the department overrode her objections.
Yeah, so there's policies in place to check personal ambition, personal objectives of individuals. Then that's something that we've certainly had to negotiate before with the particular regulator or a particular regulator that we've worked with and their bosses, essentially. Yeah. Sometimes one time I got on a phone call with the regulator and we just openly negotiated on the interpretation of the code in particular documents. One of the comments made earlier is the turnover. I think that's that's a comment, and the inconsistency from the regulators that happens from the turnover. Corey was mentioning the turnover earlier. And sometimes people get into these roles and they're just not aware of all the different code and the interpretations of the code or the precedent. So in those situations, it's a lot of, hey, let's do this together. Let's figure this out together. In the past, this is what's happened. I want to help you out. I know you're new here. Let's figure this out together, right? And as a consultant, I have a better position to do that than an individual developer or landowner, because in terms of the regulator, a consultant is kind of like their colleague, right? We're a bridge. As a private landowner, they're the person that is being regulated, right? So it's a little different dynamic there. Okay, thanks, Lance. Nice to talk to you. Yeah. Any other questions for anybody?
From a bonding perspective, we typically have a hard time bonding the 5-year maintenance and monitoring for the developer if the developer is not going to retain any ownership of the project.
Oh, that's good to know. Interesting.
How are you contracted for the maintenance and monitoring period? Like, do you get a contract with the HOA if the developer is long gone? Or
you
do?
Yeah. I mean, it depends on the project, but yeah, we just get a contract with the HOA. And actually, that's what we did with this project. We are contracted with the HOA currently.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. What is your company again? I want to.
In Integrity Surety. I'll drop you an email.
Yeah, please do. That's really helpful because I know.
Yeah.
I know clients for sure that would be interested in your services. That's great.
I've bonded a lot of your a lot of your projects. I've seen,
Oh,
I've seen, yeah,
yeah.
Aqua-Terr, yeah.
Awesome. Sweet. Thank you, Dan. Well, thanks everybody. Yeah. Any other comments? Okay.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate
Yeah.
this. This is great.
Yeah,
Very
thank you.
interesting.
Yeah. Take care.
Thanks, Tony.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.